But now let's bring up John Morton from the Pew Charitable Trust and Managing Director of the Economic Policy Wing there, and who's heading up the Economic Mobility Project.
Thank you, Reed. I think my lesson there is if
you come up and we're just going to come up and sit again here.
If Congress, if anyone reads the report half as closely as Congressman Cooper has, I think we'll claim the report was a success. He clearly has gone through it and found I think a lot of the great nuggets in the report. My name is John Morton. I'm Managing Director of Economic Policy at Pew, and I oversee the Economic Mobility Project, which worked with New America and several others to publish the report that we have out in the front today. As the saying goes, a penny saved is a penny earned, but the question is, does a penny saved translate into greater economic mobility? And that's really the question that we set out to explore with this report. And the report we're releasing today looks at that question and finds that both across generations, but also within individual lifetimes, greater savings does indeed positively impact economic mobility, particularly for people at the bottom of the economic ladder. Additionally, the report finds, as the Congressman suggested, that there are disincentives in the federal tax code and public assistance programs, and considers how public policy could be changed or considered to be changed to encourage greater upward mobility. And I think Reed and Work will discuss some of those recommendations a little bit later today. Very briefly about this project, I think many of you are familiar with it. We've been around for about 3 years now. We are a very broad and strange bedfellows coalition of principals and advisors from New America, Heritage, Brookings, Urban, and the American Enterprise Institute. We came together under a banner of trying to better investigate the health and status of economic mobility in America today. We didn't have a policy dog in the fight. We weren't trying to prove or disprove a train of thought. We really wanted to better understand what the status of mobility in America was. And we found a really glass half full, glass half empty story. We found that by and large, most families were doing better across a generation. 80% of children were 80% of children born poor were in fact making more money a generation later than they had been born as children. But 42% of those born poor were still in that bottom quintile. We're still at the bottom of the distribution a generation later. So if you're born poor, you do in fact rise with the tide, but you remain at the bottom of the ladder, if you will. And that percentage is about double the percentage found in many other industrialized countries. So we refer to it as kind of stickiness at the bottom. If you're born poor, yes, you rise, but you rise at a much slower rate than the rest of the distribution here. And I think that challenged a lot of our members, right, left, and center, to ask, why is that? We also found great racial differences. We found that if you're born to middle-income African-American families, you have almost a 50% chance of falling from the middle income to the bottom of the income distribution over a period of the last generation. Very troubling findings. Now, why did we focus on economic mobility? Because, as the Congressman suggested, it really is a core American ideal. This question of where you're born, does it dictate where you end up? And that's the question we set out to investigate. We came up with a fairly broad scope of indicators. What are the factors or indicators that determine how one progresses through upward through society? And we divided them into 3 buckets: human capital, social capital, and financial capital. And we'll be talking later today about some of the drivers in that financial capital bucket, these savings and wealth creation vehicles later. And we found, and the reports today find, I think quite interestingly, that parental savings very, very clearly boost the economic mobility of children, particularly among families who begin in the bottom income, the bottom of the income ladder. Just half of children born to low-income parents that have low savings leave the bottom income quartile over a generation. So let's pause on that for a moment. If you're born poor and your parents have low savings, you've got less than a 50% chance of leaving that bottom rung of the ladder over a generation. Okay? On the other hand, if you're born to that same poor family, but your parents have high savings, you've got almost a 3/4 chance of leaving the bottom rung, holding income constant and holding all else constant. So just that differential rate of savings, now obviously a lot of other things are caught up in that, but just that differential rate of savings is a large predictor of the incremental benefit that you will have in terms of upward mobility. That's a very powerful finding. And the same thing holds true when you look at upward mobility within a generation, so not across a generation, but within a generation. So among adults who were in the bottom income quartile over a period of time in the 1980s, 34% left the bottom if their initial savings were low, compared with 55% who rose up if their savings levels were high. So this finding holds not just across generations, but within generations. And so we think, and I'm sure Reed will say more about this in work as well, that this really does highlight a very strong correlation between savings rate and upward mobility. I'll say one brief word before concluding about the findings within which these, or the setting within which these recommendations are being published. On the table out behind the door, you'll find our project's bipartisan policy roadmap for enhancing economic mobility. We released this about 2 weeks ago, and this is really the culmination of about 2.5 years of work that our principals from these 5 distinguished think tanks came together, knocked heads, sometimes quite bloodily, but came to consensus agreements on 25 recommendations spanning these financial, human, and social capital areas that we believe policymakers should focus more attention on. These are recommendations from early education to strengthening families on the social capital to investing in more savings incentives to worker training, etc. Where we really do believe that that the federal government needs to focus more time and attention if indeed we are committed to enhancing economic mobility for all Americans. And I will say 2 other things about these recommendations. They are done within the framework, or they are recommended within the framework of what we call a portfolio shift. A portfolio shift in 2 ways. The first is that our principals group sees us spending about $750 billion every year on what we call a mobility budget. And this is a very detailed analysis that was led by Gene Sturley at the Urban Institute, focusing on how much the federal government spends every year on economic mobility, $750 billion. So not a small amount of money. But we see that money going largely to middle and upper income families. So it's not a shortage of money, it's a question of where it's being targeted. And we don't call for massive redistributions in the roadmap. We merely say that as we look about where we should be spending money, it's not a shortage of money, it may be a targeting question. And the second area that we highlight in the roadmap, and again, this is a consensus document of our principles from right, left, and center, is that we say that often in policy, we spend money on income maintenance programs which may not do much to enhance economic mobility, which may do a lot to shore up and provide supports for people, but may not do a lot to support the underlying drivers of future economic mobility. And again, a lot more detail about what we mean by that is found in the roadmap, which I encourage you to pick up on your way out. So with that, there are some tremendously interesting and provocative and more substantive recommendations that are related to savings, both in the roadmap and that Reed and Rourke will preview now. Thank you for being here. Please visit us at economicmobility.org, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow. Thank you.